Mum, you need to give Liam the jewelry now. My daughter Sarah said it like she was asking for the salt. We were at my dining table. The Sunday pot roast I'd been tending since dawn was half eaten on our plates. My grandson, Liam, didn't even look up from his phone. He was 18, with the world on a string. I put my fork down. It made a small clinking sound against the china my mother had given me. The jewelry? I asked. My voice was steady. I was proud of that. Yes, Sarah said, waving her hand. Your mother's things. The diamond earrings, that sapphire ring. Liam is going to college. He needs to look the part. He'll sell it. Get a better car, nicer clothes. Make connections. I looked at Liam. He was scrolling, his thumb moving in a blur. He grunted something that might have been agreement. The smell of rosemary and roasted potatoes suddenly seemed thick and heavy in the air. My granddaughter, Chloe, sat next to him. She was 16, and she was watching me. Her eyes were wide and worried. She put her hand on my arm for just a second, a light touch, then pulled it back. I picked up my water glass. The ice cubes rattled. It's not for selling, Sarah. It's for family. We are family, she said, her voice getting that sharp edge. And Liam is the one with the bright future. It's an investment in him. I looked at the jewelry on my own hands. My wedding band, worn thin after 50 years. My husband, Robert, had been gone for 3. He would have known just what to say, but he wasn't here. It was just me, the hum of the refrigerator, and the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. The silence in my little house was loud after they left. Sarah hadn't hugged me goodbye. Liam had already been in the car, the radio thumping through the closed windows. Only Chloe had lingered. She'd squeezed my hand and whispered, "I love your roast, Grandma." I washed the good china by hand, the warm, soapy water feeling good on my skin. I remembered buying Liam his first bicycle. It was a shiny red Schwinn. I'd used 2 months of my Social Security to pay for it. He'd ridden it for a summer, then left it out in the rain to rust. I remembered paying for his tutoring when he almost failed algebra. I remembered the $500 I gave Sarah for his senior trip, money I'd set aside for a new hearing aid. I never mentioned that to her. I walked into the living room and looked at the mantel. Tucked behind a photo of Robert was a small handmade card. It was made of construction paper, with a wobbly drawing of a bluebird on the front. Chloe had made it for me last year for my birthday. Inside it said, "You're my favorite person. Love, Chloe." Sarah and Liam had sent a text message, 2 days late. I sank into my worn armchair. The springs creaked a familiar hello. I pulled my grandmother's old quilt over my lap. The fabric was soft and smelled faintly of cedar. I wasn't angry. That came later. At that moment, I just felt a deep, quiet coldness spreading through my chest. The next morning, after my coffee, I went to my bedroom closet. On the top shelf, tucked behind a stack of old photo albums, was a dark blue velvet box. It was heavy. The brass latch made a soft click when I opened it. There they were. My mother's diamond earrings, small and brilliant. My grandmother's engagement ring, a tiny pearl in a nest of gold. The sapphire ring Robert had bought me for our 20th anniversary. He'd saved for a whole year. Each piece was a story, a memory. I picked up a simple silver locket. Inside was a tiny picture of me as a baby and one of my mother as a young woman. Sarah had never asked about it. Liam had never seen it. They saw a price tag. I saw a life. My phone rang, making me jump. It was Sarah. "Have you thought about it?" she asked. No hello. "I'm looking at the jewelry right now," I said calmly, tracing the engraving on the locket. "Good," she said, relieved. Liam has his eye on a nice Audi. The down payment would be perfect. Just think of it, Mum. He'd be so happy. I thought of Chloe, who had her eye on a set of art pencils she couldn't afford. I thought of her quiet sketches, her good grades, her gentle heart. I need to think, Sarah, I said. There's nothing to think about, she snapped. Why are you being so difficult? I hung up the phone. The dial tone buzzed for a moment before I set the receiver back in its cradle. I closed the velvet box. The decision was made. I didn't call a pawn shop. I called Mr. Abernathy. He had a small, respectable shop downtown called Abernathy and Sons, Appraisers. The bell over his door tinkled when I walked in. The air inside smelled of wood polish and old paper. A tall clock ticked softly in the corner. Mr. Abernathy was a kind man with white hair and gentle eyes behind spectacles. He remembered me from when Robert and I had brought in an old watch. Mrs. Gable, he said, smiling. A pleasure to see you. What have you brought me today? I placed the velvet box on the polished wood counter between us. He opened it carefully. He didn't say a word for a long time. He used a soft cloth and a jeweler's loupe, examining each piece under a bright lamp. He handled them with a reverence that made my throat tighten. These were loved, he said finally, looking up at me. You can always tell. I nodded, unable to speak. He wrote down figures on a clean white pad of paper. He turned the pad around for me to see. The final number at the bottom was $87,000. I stared at it. It was more than my car was worth. It was more than I had in my savings account. It was a future. Thank you, Mr. Abernathy, I said, my voice clear and strong. I would like to sell them. All of them. He looked surprised for a moment, then gave me a small, understanding nod. Of course, Mrs. Gable. I will handle it personally. The check from Mr. Abernathy felt unreal in my hands. I didn't drive home. I drove straight to my local credit union. Brenda, the teller with the bright pink nails, smiled when she saw me. Eleanor, good to see you. Just here to deposit your check? She asked, looking at the Social Security envelope in my other hand. That and this, I said, sliding the much larger check under the glass. Brenda's eyes went wide. She didn't ask questions. She just nodded and said, Let me get the branch manager. We'll set you up in a comfortable chair. While I waited, I pulled out my little flip phone and dialed Chloe's number. She answered on the second ring. Hi, Grandma. Her voice was like a little bit of sunshine. Hello, dear. How was school? I asked, watching the manager walk toward me. It was okay. I got an A on my history paper, she said. I could hear the pride in her voice. What are you up to? Oh, just running a few errands, I said. The vinyl chair squeaked as I settled into it across from the manager's desk. I was just thinking of you. I'm so proud of you, sweetheart. I love you, Grandma, she said. I love you too, I replied, and hung up. The manager, a nice young man named Mr. Harris, smiled at me. Mrs. Gable, Brenda tells me you've come into some funds. How can we help you invest them? I took a deep breath. The air smelled like coffee and clean carpets. I want to create an educational trust, I said, my voice steady, for my granddaughter. Mr. Harris was very thorough. He explained everything in simple terms, without making me feel old or foolish. The papers he slid across the desk were thick and official. The pen felt heavy in my hand. I signed my name, Eleanor Gable, on each dotted line. My signature was a little shaky, but it was firm. The trust is in place, he said, stacking the papers neatly. It will be managed by the bank until your granddaughter turns 18. It can be used for tuition, books, housing, any legitimate educational expense. And no one else can touch it? I asked. It was the most important question. No one, he confirmed, his voice kind. Not without your express written permission, or Chloe's, once she is of age. It's completely secure. I felt a wave of relief, so strong I could have floated out of my chair. It was done. It was safe. I had taken something meant for vanity and turned it into a foundation, a real future. I walked out of the credit union into the bright afternoon sun. The air felt lighter. My phone rang that evening, just as I was settling in to watch the news. It was Sarah. Her name on the little screen no longer made my stomach clench. "So?" she said. "Liam and I can come by tomorrow to pick up the jewellery. He found the perfect car online." I took a sip of my chamomile tea. The warm mug felt good in my hands. The television murmured in the background. "Tomorrow isn't a good day for me, dear. I have my church potluck. Mum, this is more important than a casserole," she said, her voice tight with impatience. "Liam needs to get this done before someone else buys the car." "We can talk about it on Sunday," I said. My voice was even, calm. I was just a sweet old lady making plans for the week. She huffed, a loud, dramatic sound. "Fine, but have it ready, all of it, in a box." "I'll see you on Sunday, Sarah," I said, and I hung up before she could reply. I turned up the volume on the television. The weatherman was promising a sunny weekend. I smiled. It sounded just right. Chloe came over on Saturday morning. She never came empty-handed. This time it was a small pot of purple pansies for my porch. Her fingers were smudged with dirt. "I thought they'd look nice next to the door," she said, her smile a little shy. "They're beautiful, sweetheart." "Thank you." We spent the afternoon in the kitchen. I taught her my mother's recipe for snickerdoodles. The air filled with the warm smell of cinnamon and sugar. Chloe was a careful student. She measured the flour exactly and rolled each ball of dough perfectly in the cinnamon mixture. Her hands, usually busy sketching in a notebook, moved with a quiet grace. "Liam seems excited about college," she said, placing the cookies on the cooling rack. She didn't look at me. "I'm sure he is," I said carefully. She hesitated. "He talks a lot about the stuff he's going to buy." She finally looked at me, her young face full of a worry she couldn't quite name. "Grandma, you don't have to give him anything." I stopped what I was doing and put my arm around her thin shoulders. She leaned into me. "I know, dear," I whispered into her hair. "Don't you worry about it." We stood there for a moment, surrounded by the comforting scent of our baking. Sunday came. I made a simple lunch, tuna sandwiches and iced tea. I didn't bother with a pot roast. Sarah and Liam arrived right at noon. Liam walked straight to the living room and slumped onto the sofa, pulling out his phone. Sarah stood in the kitchen doorway, her arms crossed. Her purse was slung over her shoulder like she was ready for a quick getaway. "Okay, Mum. Where is it?" she asked. I sat down at my kitchen table. The sun streamed through the window, making a warm patch on the linoleum floor. "Have a seat, Sarah," I said. She remained standing. "I don't have time for games. Just give me the box." I folded my hands on the tabletop. I looked right at her. "There is no box, Sarah. There is no jewellery." Her face went through 3 changes in 3 seconds. Confusion, annoyance, then a dawning anger. "What are you talking about? What did you do?" "I had it appraised," I said simply, "and then I sold it." The silence in the room was absolute, except for the hum of the refrigerator. Even the video game sounds from Liam's phone had stopped. He was staring at me. You what? Sarah's voice was a strangled whisper. You sold my son's future. No, I said, my voice as clear as a bell. I invested it. I stood up and walked to the counter where I'd left the folder from the bank. I slid one document across the table to her. The letterhead read, Chloe Gable Educational Trust. She stared at the paper, then at me. Her face was pale. You did this to spite me. No, I said again, my heart calm and steady. I did it because true value is earned, not demanded. Sarah began to shout. The words were ugly, selfish, cruel, senile. She accused me of loving Chloe more. She said I had ruined Liam's life. Liam, for his part, just looked stunned. My car, he mumbled, like a little boy. What about my Audi? I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I just stood there in my own kitchen and let the storm break over me. It was just noise, like a train passing in the distance. It couldn't touch me. When she finally ran out of breath, her face red and blotchy, I spoke. I think it's time for you to leave, I said. She snatched her purse. Don't expect to hear from us again, she hissed. You've made your choice. Yes, I said. I have. They left. The front door slammed hard enough to rattle the little glass panes. The silence they left behind was wonderful. It was clean. I walked through my quiet house, touching the back of my husband's chair, straightening a photograph on the wall. I went to the porch and looked at the little pot of purple pansies Chloe had brought. They were bright and cheerful in the afternoon sun. I felt no anger, no regret. I just felt free. The first week of silence was strange. The phone didn't ring on Tuesday for my weekly call with Sarah. The house felt bigger. I found myself listening for the sound of a car pulling into the driveway, but none came. It wasn't sad. It was just quiet. My friend Martha from the church quilting circle called on Wednesday. Eleanor, you weren't at Bible study. Is everything all right? Her voice was warm and crackled a little over the line. I'm fine, Martha. Just reorganizing a few things around the house, I said. I was sitting at my kitchen table, a cup of tea in my hands. The morning sun was making the dust motes dance in the air. Reorganizing? At our age, that's an extreme sport, she chuckled. Well, don't overdo it. We're making a memory quilt for the pastor's anniversary. We need your steady hand with the stitching. I'll be there next week, I promised. The thought of sitting with those women, the soft chatter and the snip-snip of scissors, felt like an anchor. It felt normal. I did reorganize. I went through Robert's old desk. It was full of papers, warranties for appliances we no longer owned, old tax returns, bank statements from a decade ago. It smelled faintly of his pipe tobacco and Old Spice. I sorted everything into two piles, keep and shred. Under a stack of Medicare statements, I found a small leather-bound book. It was a list of stocks he had owned. Small investments, nothing grand. A few shares in the electric company, some in a local bank. I had forgotten all about them. They were all in my name now, of course. I made an appointment with Mr. Harris at the credit union for the following week. Not about Chloe's trust, but about my own accounts. I felt a little flutter of something new. It wasn't fear. I think it was anticipation. Sarah's voice echoed in my head from that awful Sunday. Why are you being so difficult? I wasn't being difficult. I was being deliberate. My sister's daughter, my niece Carol, called on Saturday. I knew the moment I heard her voice that Sarah had spoken to her. Carol was always a bit of a drama magnet. Aunt Eleanor, she said, her voice dripping with fake concern. Sarah is just beside herself. She told me what happened. I can't believe you would sell Grandma's jewelry. That was our family's heritage. I looked out the window at my bird feeder. A little blue jay was cracking a sunflower seed. It was my mother's jewelry, Carol, and it was my decision to make. But for Liam, he's the first one in the family to go to a big state university. You should be supporting him, not punishing him. I took a slow breath. The air was clean and cool in my house. I am supporting education in this family, I said evenly. Very much so. Well, she huffed, realizing she wasn't getting the reaction she wanted. I just think it's a shame, at your age, to be turning your back on family. I didn't turn my back, I thought. I just stopped letting them walk all over it. But I didn't say that. I just said, "Thank you for your concern, Carol. I have to go. My lemon cake is about to come out of the oven." I hung up before she could say another word. Martha picked me up for the quilting circle the next Tuesday. As I got into her car, a big, comfortable Buick, the scent of lavender air freshener met me. She patted my hand. "It's good to see you out and about," she said, and left it at that. We sat in the church basement, the fluorescent lights humming above us. The table was covered in colourful fabric squares. I showed Martha the stockbook I had found. She peered at it over her reading glasses. "Robert was a smart man," she said. "He always looked after you." "He did," I agreed, threading my needle. "But now I have to learn to look after myself." I told her about selling the jewelry, about the trust, about the phone call with Carol. She just listened, nodding slowly. "You know," I said, smoothing a piece of blue calico fabric, "for 50 years, I was a wife, then a mother, then a grandmother. I was a list of things I did for other people." I paused, looking at the steady motion of my own hand pushing the needle through the cloth. When Sarah left, I felt like I had been fired from my job, but then I realized something. Martha looked at me, her needle still. "I didn't die," I said. "I just stopped being convenient." I drove myself to the bank to meet with Mr. Harris again. I wore my good navy blue dress, the one with the pearl buttons. I felt capable. I showed him the stockbook. He helped me sort through it all. He explained dividends and portfolios in that same patient way he had before. It turned out Robert's small investments had grown over the years. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough. "You're in very good shape, Mrs. Gable," he said, with a warm smile. "You have options." "I want to take a trip," I said, the words surprising me as they came out. "I've always wanted to see the ocean in Oregon." "That sounds wonderful," he said. "And," I added, feeling a smile spread across my own face, "I want to take my granddaughter with me, after she graduates. My treat." He nodded, already pulling out the paperwork to make it happen. I felt a lightness in my chest, a feeling I hadn't realized was missing for a very long time. I needed to tell Chloe. It wasn't fair to let her hear it from her mother. I invited her for lunch the next Saturday. I made her favorite, chicken noodle soup from scratch. The whole house smelled of celery and herbs. We sat at the kitchen table. The steam from our bowls warmed our faces. After we ate, I brought out 2 cups of tea and a thin manila folder. I slid it across the table to her. Her hand hesitated before she opened it. She read the first page slowly. Her brow furrowed in confusion, then her eyes grew wide. She looked up at me, her mouth slightly open. "Grandma, what is this?" This is a lot of money." "It's for you," I said softly. "For college, for books, for a good, strong start in your life." Tears welled in her eyes. "But the jewelry, your mother's earrings." I reached across the table and took her hand. Her skin was so young and smooth. "My mother would be so proud to know her things helped build your future." Jewelry is just pretty rocks, sweetheart. A good mind is a treasure no one can ever take from you. She squeezed my hand, the tears now rolling down her cheeks. She didn't say anything else. She didn't need to. The phone call came 2 days later. It wasn't Sarah. It was my son-in-law, Chloe's father, David. He was a quiet man who usually stayed out of things. "Eleanor?" he said, his voice strained. "Sarah told me what you did for Chloe. I just wanted to say thank you." There was a long pause. I could hear Sarah yelling something in the background. "She's a wonderful girl, David. She deserves every chance in the world," I said. "I know," he said, his voice heavy. "Things are difficult here right now. Sarah feels—" He trailed off. "I understand," I said, though I wasn't sure I did. I understood his position, caught in the middle. But I no longer understood my daughter's anger. It felt like a language I had forgotten how to speak. "Just thank you," he said again, and hung up. I put the phone down. Outside, a delivery truck rumbled past. I had a feeling that was the last I would hear from their house for a while. And I was all right with that. Martha convinced me to join the community garden. "You have a green thumb, Eleanor," she'd said. "It's a crime to keep it confined to a few porch pots." So, on a bright, cool morning, I found myself standing in front of a small, empty plot of earth. The air smelled of damp soil and marigolds. My plot was next to a man named George. He was a retired mailman with a kind, crinkly smile and hands that were permanently stained with dirt. "First time?" he asked, leaning on his shovel. "First time in a long time," I admitted, pulling on my new gardening gloves. The canvas was stiff. "The secret is good compost," he said, pointing a thumb toward a large bin. "And talking to your tomatoes. They get lonely." I laughed, a real, genuine laugh that started deep in my belly. I spent the morning turning the soil, my muscles aching in a good way. I wasn't a wife or a mother or a grandmother. I was just a woman with a patch of earth, getting ready to plant something new. A month passed. My garden plot was thriving with tiny green shoots. My days fell into a comfortable rhythm: quilting on Tuesdays, gardening on Thursdays, church on Sundays. One afternoon, I was at the grocery store, deciding between Roma and beefsteak tomatoes. I heard a familiar voice. "Grandma?" I turned. It was Liam. He looked thinner, and there were tired circles under his eyes. He was holding a basket with a box of cereal and a gallon of milk. "Hello, Liam," I said. My voice was calm. "Mom's still, you know," he said, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "She took my car keys. Says I need to get a job to pay for my own gas now." I put a few tomatoes in a plastic bag. The vinyl crinkled. "A job is a good thing to have," I said mildly. He looked down at his worn-out sneakers. "Yeah. Look, I'm sorry about how I acted." It sounded like the words pained him to say. "That stuff with the jewelry. I was just listening to Mom." "I know," I said. And I did. He was a boy who had been told his whole life that the world owed him something. Maybe he was finally learning it didn't. I paid for my groceries and walked out into the sunshine, leaving him standing in the produce aisle. Chloe finished her final exams with straight A's. To celebrate, I took her out for ice cream. We sat at a small table outside the shop. The metal chairs were cool on our legs. The sweet smell of waffle cones hung in the air. I pulled the travel brochures for Oregon out of my purse. I had picked them up from the travel agency downtown. "I think it's time we started planning our trip," I said, laying them on the table between our dripping cones. Her eyes lit up. "For real, Grandma?" "For real," I confirmed. tapping a picture of a dramatic, rocky coastline. We'll go in August, before you get busy with college applications. She looked from the brochures to my face, her expression a mix of joy and disbelief. This is the best summer ever, she whispered. I took a bite of my mint chocolate chip. The ice cream was cold and sweet. I looked at my granddaughter, her face full of hope, and I knew she was right. It was the start of something new, for both of us. My tomatoes were the first to ripen in the community garden. They were a deep, confident red. George, my gardening neighbour, came over to inspect one. He held it in his palm like it was a jewel. "That's a beauty, Eleanor," he said, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "You've got the touch." "The secret is talking to them," I said, repeating his earlier advice. The sun was warm on my back, and a light breeze rustled the leaves of the zucchini plants. He chuckled. "Well, whatever you're saying, they're listening." He handed the tomato back to me. It was heavy and smelled of sunshine and earth. I thought of the cold, hard weight of the sapphire ring. This felt better. This was something I had grown myself. This warmth was real. The phone rang on a Thursday morning while I was dusting the living room. I almost didn't answer. But I did. It was Sarah. Her voice was flat, all the anger seemingly burned out of it. "Mum," she said, "I need you to do something." I waited, holding the receiver. The scent of lemon polish hung in the air. I could hear the faint sound of a television on her end of the line. "Liam needs a car for his new job at the warehouse," she said. "A used one. The bank won't give him a loan without a co-signer." The silence stretched. I looked at a photograph of Robert on the mantel. He was smiling. I knew exactly what he would have said. "I'm sorry, Sarah," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I can't do that." "What? Why not? It's just a signature." Her voice climbed, that familiar edge of frustration returning. "Why are you being so difficult?" "It isn't my responsibility anymore," I said. "My finances are my own now. I wish him the best of luck with his job." I hung up the phone gently. I didn't feel angry or triumphant. I just felt finished with it. Chloe came over that afternoon to work on our Oregon trip plans. We sat at the dining room table with my laptop, the screen glowing between us. We looked at pictures of little seaside hotels and rocky beaches. Chloe's finger traced the coastline on the screen. "This one has a balcony overlooking the ocean, Grandma," she said, her voice full of excitement. "Can you imagine? Waking up and hearing the waves?" "I can," I said, sipping my iced tea. The glass was cool and beaded with sweat. "Let's book it." She clicked the mouse. A confirmation page popped up. It was real. We were going. Chloe leaned over and gave me a fierce hug. Her hair smelled like clean shampoo. "Thank you," she whispered. "This is better than any jewelry in the world." I hugged her back, my eyes closing for a moment. "I know, sweetheart. I know." At the church potluck that Sunday, the fellowship hall buzzed with conversation. The air was a mix of baked ham, scalloped potatoes, and coffee. Agnes Miller, a woman who knew everyone's business, cornered me by the dessert table. "Eleanor, dear," she said, her voice a low murmur. "We haven't seen Sarah or her boy in ages. Is everything all right in the family?" Her eyes were sharp and curious. I carefully placed a slice of my lemon cake on a paper plate. "They're finding their own way," I said with a pleasant smile. "Liam has a new job he's focused on, and Sarah is busy with her own life. It's how it should be." Martha, who had been standing nearby, stepped up and put an arm on my shoulder. "Eleanor's tomatoes won first prize at the garden fair," she announced to Agnes. changing the subject as smoothly as she switched thread colours on a quilt. Agnes's attention shifted, and the moment passed. I gave Martha a grateful look. She just winked. A few weeks later, I was leaving the library with a stack of books. As I walked to my car, I saw Liam. He was across the street, wearing a bright orange vest and pushing a lawnmower. He was part of a landscaping crew, working on the courthouse lawn. The sun was high and hot. Sweat was dripping down his face. He pushed the mower with a steady, determined rhythm. He wasn't looking at his phone. He wasn't slouched over with boredom. He was just working. He stopped for a moment to wipe his brow with the back of his arm, and his eyes met mine across the street. There was no anger in his gaze, just a tired sort of recognition. I gave him a small, simple nod. He nodded back, then turned and pulled the cord to restart his mower. The engine sputtered to life, and he continued his straight, even lines across the grass. I got in my car and drove home. The trip to Oregon was everything I had imagined. Chloe and I stood on a cliff overlooking the Pacific Ocean. The wind was strong and smelled of salt and cold, clean water. It whipped my hair around my face. Down below, massive waves crashed against black rocks, sending white foam high into the air. Chloe held my arm, her eyes wide with wonder. "It's so big, Grandma," she shouted over the roar of the surf. "It certainly is," I shouted back. We had spent our days walking on the beach, collecting smooth grey stones and watching the seagulls. In the evenings, we sat on the balcony of our little hotel room, wrapped in blankets, listening to the ocean's steady rhythm. I had never felt so small, and yet so peaceful. I wasn't anyone's mother or widow. I was just Eleanor, watching the tide come in. We came home refreshed, our skin tanned by the sun and wind. A few days later, Chloe called me, her voice buzzing with an energy I hadn't heard in years. "Grandma, you won't believe it. I used some of the money from the trust to buy a real digital art tablet, the kind the professionals use." "That's wonderful, sweetheart," I said, picturing her bent over a new screen, her face illuminated by its glow. "It's amazing. I can practice for my college portfolio. I feel like I can really do this, you know?" "I know," I said, my heart feeling full. "I always knew you could." I thought of the diamond earrings, sold to a stranger. They had bought this excitement, this confidence. It was a far better trade. I ran into my son-in-law, David, at the hardware store. I was buying birdseed, and he was looking at paint swatches. He looked tired. The skin around his eyes was tight. "Eleanor," he said, giving me a small, weary smile. "Good to see you." "You too, David. Redecorating?" I asked, gesturing to the colourful strips of paper in his hand. "Sarah wants to repaint the living room," he said with a sigh. "She says she needs a change." He lowered his voice. "She's not happy. Hasn't been for a while." I just nodded. I didn't know what to say to that. "Chloe seems good, though," he added, looking me in the eye. "She's got a spark. Thank you for that." "She earned it," I said softly. He nodded, then turned back to the paint swatches, as if the choice between eggshell and antique white was the heaviest burden in the world. The community garden was overflowing with the bounty of late summer. My basket was heavy with tomatoes, cucumbers, and green beans. George was harvesting his bell peppers, which were a brilliant, glossy red. "You've got enough there to feed an army, Eleanor," he said, wiping his brow with the back of a dirt-smudged hand. "My freezer is already full," I laughed. "I'm starting to give them away to the neighbours." "I've got the same problem with these peppers," he said, holding one up. "Tell you what, I'll trade you a bag of these for a jar of those famous pickles you make. That sounds like a fair trade, I agreed. He hesitated for a moment, then added, or maybe we could just have a cup of coffee sometime. Talk about something other than zucchini. His smile was shy, but genuine. I'd like that very much, George, I said, and the afternoon sun felt just a little bit warmer. One Saturday, I was driving home from the grocery store. I took the long way, down Sarah's street. It was a habit I hadn't quite broken. As I neared her house, I saw something new in the driveway. It was a car, not an Audi. It was a small blue Ford Fiesta. It was at least 10 years old, but it was clean, and it shined in the sun. Liam was washing it. He had a bucket of soapy water and a large sponge. He was scrubbing the hubcaps with a focus I had never seen in him. He was working carefully, methodically. He had his sleeves rolled up, and his arms were tan from his landscaping job. He must have heard my car, because he looked up. Our eyes met for a long moment through my windshield. I didn't smile, and he didn't scowl. He just gave me a short, almost imperceptible nod. Then he turned back to his car, and continued to wash it. I pressed my foot on the accelerator and drove home. George and I started having coffee every Saturday morning. We met at a little diner downtown called the Corner Booth. It smelled of bacon and brewing coffee. The waitresses all knew his name. He told me stories about his years as a mailman, the dogs he'd befriended, the strange packages he'd delivered. I told him about Robert, about my garden, about my trip to Oregon with Chloe. We never talked about my daughter. He never asked, and I was grateful. One morning, he reached across the checkered tablecloth and patted my hand. His own was rough and calloused from years of work. "You're good company, Eleanor," he said. "So are you, George," I replied, and the warmth of his hand felt comfortable and kind. It wasn't a spark. It was a slow, steady ember, and that was just fine. Autumn arrived. The leaves on my big maple tree turned a brilliant orange. I was raking them into a pile when a car pulled up to the curb. It was Sarah. She got out and walked up my driveway. She looked different. Her hair wasn't perfectly styled, and she wasn't wearing her usual expensive clothes. She wore jeans and a simple sweater. She stopped a few feet away from me. The air was crisp and smelled of dry leaves. "Mum," she said. Her voice was quiet. I leaned on my rake. "Hello, Sarah." I came to apologize," she said, looking down at her shoes. "I was wrong. About the jewelry. About everything." She looked up, and I could see the tears in her eyes. I was so focused on giving Liam everything I thought he deserved, I forgot what was actually important. I didn't say anything. I just waited. A gust of wind sent a swirl of orange leaves around our feet. "He's working hard," she continued. "He bought his own car. He's paying for his own insurance. He's growing up. And Chloe is so happy, so confident. I see that now." Her voice broke. "I miss you, Mom. I miss our talks." My heart, which I thought had hardened, felt a small, painful pinch. "I miss you too," I said, and the words were true. She didn't come inside that day. It was too soon. But it was a start. A week later, she called. "I'm making a pot roast on Sunday," she said. "The way you taught me. Would you like to come over? Chloe will be here." "I'd like that," I said. The house was different, quieter. Liam wasn't there. He was working. The living room had been repainted a soft, creamy white. It felt calmer. Sarah's pot roast was almost as good as mine. The potatoes were a little underdone, but I didn't mention it. We sat at her dining table, the three of us. Chloe showed us the latest drawing on her tablet, a beautiful, detailed landscape of the Oregon coast. Sarah looked at it, really looked at it, and a genuine smile touched her lips. "That's beautiful, honey," she said. It felt like we were learning a new language, the three of us. One without demands or expectations. I updated my will. I went to see a lawyer, a nice woman with a calm voice and a very neat office. I left the house to Chloe, of course. It was the right thing to do. I also set aside a small amount for Liam. Not a fortune. Not enough for an Audi. Just enough for a security deposit on an apartment, or to fix a car when it breaks down. A little bit of help, not a handout. Then I did something for myself. I booked a trip, a real one, a 2-week cruise to Alaska. I invited Martha from the quilting circle to come with me. She was so excited she nearly dropped her thimble. When I told George about it over coffee, he smiled his crinkly smile. "Alaska, huh? You'd better send me a postcard." "I'll do better than that," I said. "I'll bring you back a souvenir." One afternoon, I found the old, empty velvet jewelry box at the back of my closet. It was still beautiful, the dark blue velvet soft to the touch. It felt like a relic from another life. I took it out to my little garden shed. I filled it with seed packets, marigolds, zinnias, and my prize-winning tomatoes. I tied it with a simple ribbon and wrote a small card. The next day, I drove to Sarah's house. I left the box on her front porch. I didn't ring the bell. I just set it by the door, next to a pot of yellow mums. The card just said, "For your new garden. Love, Mom." It was time to plant something new. We all needed to. The cruise to Alaska was a world of blue ice and deep, quiet water. Martha and I would sit on our little balcony, wrapped in thick wool blankets, and watch glaciers carve their way to the sea. The air was so cold and clean, it felt like a brand new world. "Can you believe this, Eleanor?" Martha said one afternoon, her breath making a little cloud in the air. "Two old ladies like us, at the top of the world." "We're not old," I said, sipping my hot chocolate. The mug was warm in my gloved hands. "We're seasoned." She laughed, a hearty sound that seemed to echo over the water. "Well, I've never felt more seasoned than I do right now." My phone buzzed with a text message. It was a picture from Chloe. She had won a regional art competition for a digital painting she'd done of the Oregon coast. Underneath the picture, she had written, "This is because of you, Grandma. Thank you for believing in me." I showed the phone to Martha. She patted my arm. "Now that's a better investment than any diamond," she said. When I returned, my little house felt welcoming and safe. My garden was waiting, ready to be put to bed for the winter. The first thing I did was call George. We met at the corner booth the next morning. "You're back," he said, his smile reaching his eyes. "I missed our Saturdays." "I missed them too," I admitted. The familiar smell of bacon and coffee felt like coming home. I slid a small, wrapped box across the table to him. "Your souvenir." He opened it. Inside was a hand-carved wooden bear, small and intricately detailed. "He's a handsome fellow," George said, turning it over in his hands. "Thank you, Eleanor." "You're welcome." "So," he said, leaning forward slightly, "now that you've seen the world, are you going to get tired of this little town?" I looked out the diner window at the familiar street. People bustled by, their coats pulled tight against the autumn chill. "No, George," I said, meeting his gaze. "I think I'm just getting started here." Chloe was accepted into the Art Institute in Chicago. She got the letter in the mail on a Tuesday and drove straight to my house, waving it in her hand. We celebrated with a pizza and sparkling cider. "I can't believe it," she kept saying, her face glowing. "It was my first choice, my dream school." I can believe it, I said, handing her a paper plate. You have the talent, and you did the work. Later, Sarah and David came over. Sarah hugged Chloe tightly. We are so proud of you, she said, her voice thick with emotion. She looked over at me, across the room. Thank you, Mom, she mouthed silently. I just smiled and nodded. There was nothing else that needed to be said. The proof was right there, in Chloe's bright and happy eyes. Thanksgiving was at my house that year. It wasn't a big, loud affair. It was just Sarah, David, Chloe, and Liam. I made my usual turkey and stuffing. The house smelled of sage and roasting meat. Liam arrived last. He was wearing a nice button-down shirt. He handed me a pumpkin pie. I bought it from the bakery where I work on weekends, he said, a little shyly, with my employee discount. It looks wonderful, Liam. Thank you, I said. Dinner was quiet and pleasant. Sarah helped me clear the plates without being asked. Later, as Liam was leaving, he paused at the door. Grandma, he said, that pie is pretty good. You should try it. It was his way of saying something more, and I understood. I will, dear, I said. Drive safe. The first snow of winter fell a few weeks later. It was a soft, quiet snow, covering everything in a blanket of clean white. I was sitting in my armchair by the window, a cup of tea on the table beside me, watching the flakes drift down. The grandfather clock ticked its steady rhythm in the hall. The doorbell rang. It was George, a dusting of snow on the shoulders of his coat. He held 2 mugs in his hands. I was making hot chocolate, he said, and I made too much. I smiled and let him in. We sat in the living room, not saying much, just watching the snow fall. The house was warm. The air was still. My life was not loud or dramatic. It was calm. It was my own. And it was more precious than any jewel I had ever owned.